if you were facilitating a group that was trying to navigate a conflict between expertise and different perspectives, what might you recommend?
Self-awareness, right?
That's too far. I need something else.
Big recommendation for self-awareness.
Yeah, I know. And next question.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the show. This is Brave New Work, a podcast about reinventing our organizations and the search for a more adaptive and human way of working. I'm Aaron Dignan, and I'm joined by my closet-surrounded co-host, Rodney Evans.
Hello, everyone.
We are also joined today by Dr. Akilah Cadet, the founder and CEO of Change Cadet. Akilah, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Aaron and Rodney.
Today's episode, we're going to talk about systemic injustice and systems design, which has a very interesting connection and parallel. But before we unpack that, we will check in, as we always do.
We always do, and we'll check in with our lovely guest, Akilah.
Esteemed guest.
Esteemed guest. So our check-in question for today, which is one of my favorites, is when do you feel like a younger version of your current self?
That's a wonderful question. Thank you for saying I'm your esteemed guest. I showered today, so clearly it's coming through.
If you get dressed right now in 2021, you're esteemed.
I know, right? It's like, you are esteemed. You did it. I feel like my younger self. It's a close call between my Capri Sun collection and or string cheese. Yeah.
I love it.
I would have those are my snacks of choice. I have like at least one Capri Sun a day.
That's amazing. What's your favorite flavor?
Pacific Cooler. See how it said it so quickly? But I will throw in a wild cherry or a strawberry banana. Sometimes
Pacific
I do organic.
Cooler's the right answer, though.
It is the right answer.
What is your favorite flavor and why is it Pacific Cooler is the way the question should be framed.
That's how the question should be framed. But honestly, it brings me this sense of joy. It reminds me of my childhood. And it's just fun to just take the anger that I may have with dismantling white supremacy and just take that straw and stick it into the hole, and then have all this joy. So.
Nice.
I love it. Aaron, what about you?
I think for me, it's probably when I'm out on my little dorky electric scooter because I have two thoughts that go back to back. One of them is, this is unsafe. You're an adult. This is stupid. And the other is like, the wind in my hair. I'm 16 again. And they cancel each other out. So I do it again.
I love it. Very relatedly, I have been getting into the habit when I drive to the lake of doing so windows down, music loud for an hour straight.
Yes.
I just find it's a good way to loosen up before I get there. And it also just makes me feel like a kid. It's like I love getting stuck in traffic and everyone having to hear my music.
Is it hand out the window slapping the top of the car door ever?
Obviously.
Because you got to do that if you're really into it.
I mean, why have the windows down otherwise?
I tend to prefer the rolling with the homies from Clueless version out the window. Yeah, I think that's really important. And I don't want to brag, but I'm going to because self-love. I'm an exquisite car dancer. And I do not care if anyone is confused with what's happening. I'm like, it's rhythm. It's rhythm, and you probably wish you had it.
That's what's happening.
Yeah. Car choreography. it's my thing.
Oh, I love it. That's awesome.
Solid question. Okay, so today's topic, now that we're out of that woods, is the overlap between systemic injustice and systems design. And I guess we want to start by asking you if we could get clear on a few terms. So what do we mean when we say systemic injustice? And what do we mean when we say systems design?
Yeah, so when we talk about systemic injustice, we're talking about the inequities that happen from a system. Systems are everywhere. Systems are the place you buy coffee. Systems are, the government, school, where we work. And so what is not equal or fair for every person who takes part or benefits or participates in that system? When we talk about systems design, we're literally talking about the building blocks of this system and how it's created for whatever that desired outcome is. So more money, opportunity for someone, whatever. Systems design is a big term and it encompasses broad things. So we can talk about social justice that comes in system design. We can talk about environmental planning with systems design. We can talk about the social determinants of health. There's so much that comes from the design of a system. And we could literally talk about, how an app is designed. So there's so much that comes, right, from systems design. But it's really important to note when we talk about systems design, who is involved in the process of designing that system. All the same people, different people, and we're talking about different people, yes, different ethnicities and identities, but also different roles, expertise, and live experience.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just jumping right into the building a system bucket, we know, I think, that we are likely to encounter some default archetypes, some default frameworks. What do you see as the current default designs, and how do you see that dovetailing with whiteness? Like, how is the supremacist thinking and designing just baked into defaults that maybe we take for granted?
Yeah, wonderful question. It's white dominant culture or white supremacist thinking is built into every single system, pretty much worldwide, but we can keep it local, right, to the US. So it's how can white people continually benefit and remain in this place of dominance? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about white supremacy, we're talking about the best, superior, supreme, right? This special pedestal in which white people receive a benefit from. When we think about the root of white supremacy, it's actually not a bad thing. And, people are like, wait, you're Black. Why are you saying this? Well, because it's not a bad thing. It's the way in which someone can drive down the street without getting pulled over, walk into a store and be supported and helped, right? Mm-hmm. Be able to have access to money and generational wealth, or be able to get financing without a crazy loan and get the job. So there's a lot of great stuff that comes from being part of being the best, superior, supreme, hence white supremacy. And so that is the main benefit with these systems. And that's why we have this movement of anti-racism. We're talking about social justice, we're talking about homophobia, we're talking about all of these things, because these are the individuals that don't have that same benefit of the system.
And do you find that the patterns of those systems that you just described are equally present in newly born systems? Are they different? Like, as you look across time and space, is there a morphing or a shifting happening, or is it kind of a pattern that just keeps repeating itself?
I did not know I had the power to look across time and space, so I'm gonna I'm gonna think about that tonight.
That's part of the teleportation we discussed before the show. Yeah,
exactly. Teleportation. I was like, is it happening now? Can I go to Bora Bora right now? So that's a great question. I would say with newer businesses, we're thinking, some startup companies, some, be very clear, some. There is more intentionality around how do we create a culture of belonging from the start? What are we doing to make sure that we have diverse leadership as we grow, opposed to kind of doing it backwards? So, some places that's happening, but overall, America is white dominant culture, white supremacy. So autopilot is to go to that benefit, right? That's there so they can maintain dominance. I think over time, I'm not going to see it, and I'm okay with it as I look out the window and gaze at the fact that I won't see it. But, there are the generations after us that will see more intentionality in the design of the systems in which they live and work in.
So since humans have created this situation that we're in, and we've built the companies and the governments and the family structures and the schools and everything else, it stands to reason that human beings are also going to have to build more Jedi supporting systems. Mm-hmm. Are we solely responsible for more equitable systems, or are there sort of building blocks that are inherently supremacist that get in our way, even when we have the best intentions for building more equitable structures?
Yes. So for the listeners, Jedi is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, not Star Wars. Just want to put that out there. A fun fact, you actually can't use Jedi because they were like, don't do that. But
really?
No, you can say it and do it, but you aren't really supposed to write it out or something. It's weird because it's like, hey,
little copyright violation.
Yeah, fun facts that are there. So humans are the ones who are supposed to do this. Humans created racism. I didn't do that. Right? Humans created white supremacy, so they should be held accountable for how do we come to a place of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging? How can I show up every day, being anti-racist? But the interesting thing is that white people don't know what they don't know. And that's an inherent in the design of white supremacy. And even when people are doing things to combat it and be anti-racist, white people will question themselves as a product of white supremacy, because people will feel like the odd one out at times. People may be othered by their family members or friends when they're showing up for, the AAPI, Asian American Pacific Islander, or BIPOC person, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or for the LGBTQ plus person. They can be othered as a result of doing the right thing. They can be told like, hey, you're centering yourselves. And sometimes, white people are, hey, that's performative allyship. Hey, that's all of these buzzwords to deter that person, that leader, that company for doing the right thing to be more inclusive towards communities. People say underrepresented, but I like to say intentionally ignored, because it's part of the design of the system, right? We're talking disabled people, BIPOC, blah, 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 and the list goes on and on. That is the way to deter the action that's needed, the behaviors that are needed to have more equitable places, our systems, our society, our workplaces, and so forth.
Right.
So just because you brought up white centering, Akilah, and because I learned a lot about this from you, as a disclosure to our audience, I was a part of a cohort of women that Akilah coached, and it was an amazing experience. And I learned a ton from her and from my other cohort participants. So could you just talk a little bit about white centering? Because I don't think everybody understands it. And I have some questions about white centering versus just generally self-centering that maybe I'll also ask you. But yeah, can you just talk a little bit about what that means and how it shows up?
Yeah, for just the record, Rodney was a wonderful participant in the cohort and had lots of examples of being anti-racist. And I'm just very proud of you. So white centering is basically when a white person is being told, okay, that's not okay, it was offensive, racist, whatever it is, microaggression, that they will turn the narrative of the story to be about them. Well, that's not what I meant. It was just a joke, or you're taking it out of context, or I have had situations, or in college for me, and they're not listening. They're not taking it as an opportunity to learn and unlearn from what they may have said or done, right? And that experience. So they're centering themselves. Anytime someone who's from an intentionally ignored community is saying, hey, this isn't okay, it's not an opportunity to say, well, let me tell you why it is okay. And that's essentially what centering is. That's the opportunity for the person to say, like, I was unaware of that. I didn't realize that hurt. I apologize. I'm learning and unlearning, whatever. That's what should happen, is to move away from white centering. Now, go ahead and ask me the follow-up question, because you want to ask about general centering. Okay, go.
Yeah, because this is a thing that I learned about in your cohort, but not till afterward when I was thinking about it, which is just how much white people tend to be self-centered and just like take up a lot of space and make things about them and bring the narrative back to them. And I always thought of that as an attribute of an individual until I studied with you and started to be like, oh, that's an attribute that I share with white people. That's not a thing I was aware of. So yeah, I don't know. I don't know if that is a correct insight from your perspective, but it's one that I had later and wanted to ask you about.
Yeah, I mean, overall, it's like a product, still a design of the system of white supremacy, right? Because if you think about it, the way white people grow up, it's like, yeah, that's what you're supposed to do. And here's what you're going to do. And this is handed to you, or you aren't going to have this experience that's traumatizing. Doesn't mean, shit can't go down and things can't happen. But ultimately, that's what happens. Again, the product and design of white supremacy, the system of white supremacy. So when someone is saying, hey, I'm going to hold you accountable, and there's been very little or minimal opportunities for accountability, then people just go inward. White people go inward for themselves. So think about bros, right? Or brotopia, like, the white guys, right? At tech companies, bruh. Hey, yeah, nailed it. And then I just think of like a Bluetooth headset and just like all the douchey things like come into play. But so when that one white guy is held accountable for something, and it could be tiny and minor, they may overreact because they have never been told no. Never been told no. Maybe they played football and did all this stuff and they didn't have to turn their papers and someone else, they were never told no, right? Even from parents, like, no, you can do whatever you want. I want to fail out of school or I need money. And it's like, well, here you go. So everything's like, yes, yes, yes. And this is an exaggeration. But essentially, if no one's ever told no or held accountable, that's why you'll see really hard centering. That's why we call it white centering. They'll go back into themselves. It's like, why are you telling me about myself? Because no one has told me about myself. So I'm going to tell you about myself. That's literally what's happening. Right? And that's what's coming out in those situations. Now, some of your listeners might say like, well, I've been practicing yoga and I've been meditating and told to center myself. Yeah, good for you. Do that. There's nothing wrong with that. You're finding peace, your voice, you're thinking about whatever you need to do. That part is okay. The only way, the differentiation between like just general centering where you're kind of taking care of yourself and self-care and white centering is anytime, again, you're learning, you have that opportunity to learn from someone, from that lived experience you don't have, that's when you have to stop and actually center them. What's happening for you? I didn't think about that. And that is how someone can learn and unlearn.
That makes sense. Because it does feel like the broader cultural narrative is very individualistic. And so that's just the default. And then if that's the only tool in the toolkit, then that's the only move you've got. And I am definitely thinking of like major political figures saying things like, I have lots of black friends, or I have binders full of women, things that are basically trying to explain away in that exact same way. So that definitely tracks.
I do have white friends. I want to be very clear about that. And if people are going to judge me for my white friends, I can accept it.
Right. So I am curious how this gets baked in, because if we talk about systems design, my ears perk up. And when we think about supremacist ideology into an inanimate thing, a structure, a design, a process, a business. What does that design journey look like? How does it animate the inanimate?
Yeah. So some people may not know this, but I did a whole year-long program in human-centered design, and it was great. And it was fun because I'm a nerd. But when we think about design, it is, what is the benefit of this thing, this space, this place, this rule, this policy, this company? What is the benefit of that? It really should be, what's the benefit for the greater good and for everyone? But in actuality, that is not the case. And so if we think about what's happening with this system overall, what can we do to be more inclusive? That's a time to pause. Like, who's at the table for this conversation, for creating this company or introducing this new product or doing whatever? Who's at the table? There's this weird thing called eyes that some people may have heard of. So if you use eyes, right, and you're looking around, you're like, wait, we have no women here. It's just a whole bunch of white guys. Where is that opportunity? Where's that trigger? Where's that light bulb that comes on to say like, hey, this isn't the right group? We need to go back to the drawing board to bring in the right individuals, because people are like, well, that's just the system. The system was created by people.
Right.
So you have to make sure you have the right people there. So using this high-tech system called EYES, you can bring in women. You can bring in the Latina person. You can bring in the AAPI person. You can bring in the receptionist. You can bring in all these different types of individuals to get to the next level of where to go. There's another step that's called a process. And so people can write down a process to say, like, if we are introducing this thing or creating this thing, this is the process we have to follow. X percentage of this, X percentage of that, whatever. And that builds the accountability of the system.
I think where my mind goes from there is, how do you parse or navigate the difference between the different perspectives and lived experiences and stories that need to be present in order to design something in an inclusive way, in an equitable way, and the idea of expertise. So as an example, let's say we're designing the restrooms at Disneyland. There are probably people who have studied, human factors and flow of traffic and timetables and, plumbing and a bunch of other things that would inform what a quote unquote correct bathroom configuration might be. And then there are all these perspectives that haven't been considered because that very expertise was kind of born out of a particular system. How do you disentangle that? Or how would you, if you were facilitating a group that was trying to navigate a conflict between expertise and different perspectives, what might you recommend?
Self-awareness, right?
That's too far. I need something else.
Big recommendation for self-awareness.
Yeah, I know. And next question. Yeah, no. The self-awareness part is really important. I'm so glad you brought up bathrooms. So this is going to blow some people's minds away.
Let's do it.
If you were to go into an institution, restaurant, office space and look at the men's bathrooms versus the women's bathrooms, you will see the men have larger bathrooms than women, which makes no sense because there's more efficiency in urinals opposed to stalls.
We take less time.
Right. Well, we have other things going on.
Not everyone. Yeah.
But that is because men are designing the space.
Yes.
And they think of themselves. So they're like, we need the larger bathroom, not realizing that bathroom, the men's bathroom, could have had 2 more additional stalls or 3 more additional stalls to help with the fact that women are always waiting in line.
And anyone who's ever gone to the theater with their spouse during intermission hates the men that designed those bathrooms.
I had no idea that this was true.
Yeah, it's very true. So I'm a twin, and it's really important for the world to know that. But my twin is a principal and a licensed architect of a very big firm. And so she brought that up to me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so true. It's so true. And I've had friends who have opened establishments who are men. And I'm like, you did this. Why did you do this to us?
Yes.
Why did you do this to me? And so again, if we have that self-awareness of like, wait a minute, we don't need as many stalls. How can we check ourselves? How can we hold ourselves accountable with, the privilege that we have or the bias, checking our bias, what we have. What if we take a step back? Why wasn't there a woman that was brought in as an architect to design that space or, brought into the table? Or did they ask the firm if they have a woman to like, oh, does this look right to you? Opposed to stuff that's centered around men or centered around whiteness or centered around ability. Right. So I'm a disabled person. Sometimes I use a cane. I will tell you, America does not care, of being ADA compliant. So there's a policy, there's something that's in place there, but still, they're not following stuff because it's like, that's not many of us. And, I care more about the white guy's experience here. Not that there should be, a ramp or access to, or maybe that the stairs are at the right, level so that if someone is using a cane, they won't fall or feel uncomfortable or unsafe. And so that self-awareness is really important because it's how do I partner? Who do I bring in? How do I check myself, my bias? How do I check my privilege?
And related to that, assuming that you have the right people at the table, or at least a representative group of people at the table, in institutions or companies or decision-making meetings that inherently have some of these defaults of white supremacy, what are some moves to make sure that people who say have a disability or are women or are people of color can speak up in that setting or in that conversation and be like, hey, bro, too many stalls for you. Let's get that mixed up. Because certainly, the self-awareness to be aware of biases and having people in the room are super important parts of that equation. And then I'm like, okay, cool. How do you then also have the safety for people to disagree or just, provoke?
Great question. It's a few things. One, it's setting ground rules. So what are the ground rules here? How are we going to be able to know this is a safe space, for some people, a brave space? How do we know that we're not going to talk over people or what we're talking about is going to stay in this room? But really setting those expectations and always allowing for an opportunity to say like, hey, remember, these are the ground rules that we've set. And if we need to add to it at any time, let us know. Making that clear and accessible. So that's one way. The other is, I guess maybe I have not created a culture of belonging at this business because there's a high probability that there's someone who's disabled. There's someone who has a different lived experience. And there's someone who's going to school to study for the thing. There's, that's out there. So that means as leaders, they haven't role modeled the behavior of getting to know people. Of practicing learning and unlearning, having difficult conversations, crucial conversations, or, having what we call below the iceberg conversations. So if you think about culture as an iceberg, 10%, the part above the water, which we think is really big, isn't the big part. 90% of the iceberg is under the water. So 10% are the things that we know, like, oh, people can hear that I have and maybe a California accent because I'm a Valley girl.
Right.
So it can like totes come out. So they can hear that, and then they're like, oh, she speaks English, or, she appears to look like a woman. So you can figure that stuff out. When we go below the water, there's so much more that people can't see. So my disability is invisible. So I have to communicate I have a disability. I'm not always with my twin, so I have to communicate I have a twin, right? That also goes to socioeconomic status, partner status, education level. There's so much that goes into it. So what is happening for leaders to have the below the iceberg conversations with their team so they know in their self-awareness who to bring in for an ideation session? And then the third thing is, what are your policies and practices for ideation, innovation, prototyping, product development, whatever spectrum that they're on, to make sure that process is inclusive? I coach and work with a lot of beauty brands. Mm-hmm. And what a lot of beauty brands will do is they'll launch this product, but it doesn't work with deeper complexions. Mm-hmm. So that was a missed opportunity, because if you had someone with a deeper complexion on that process, then they could have made sure that that line was inclusive.
It's baffling how long this takes, too. I was actually just walking through a Target the other day and saw, for the first time on the end cap, Band-Aids in different colors. Mm-hmm. And it was like, it's almost like wheels on a suitcase to me. Like, it took this long to figure out that we could just put wheels on these things. Mm-hmm. And it took this long to realize that there are whole markets that we're not serving with Band-Aids. But mm-hmm. I guess it did.
Yeah. I mean, there's a certain time in the winter where I can use the fabric Band-Aid and it matches my skin tone. But, the interesting thing about that, Band-Aid is a very good example, is that bandages have been around for a while and they've had different complexions on there. And so now that Band-Aid is doing it, they're taking business away from bandages, which is a Black-owned company. And so part of it is like, are they partnering? How could that happen? I don't know. Right. So there's a lot of stuff that goes there. Same thing when we're thinking about product design. Same thing for nude tones, makeup, nude tones, right? Nude tones are for white people, right? But nudes are actually more than just one color. And so that's why you have lingerie brands and shoe brands that have a spectrum, a full inclusive spectrum of different shades of nudes to be inclusive.
That's so wild. Also, just going back to the beginning of this conversation about the ways in which defaults are white supremacist in nature, like, literally, I've never thought before this very moment about the fact that when I buy a bra on the internet and I choose the color nude, it is for a white person.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But like, nude means naked. Nude means without something on it, which could be so many other shades. That's wild. That shit is everywhere, man.
Yeah. Which is why
I mean, as you obviously have dedicated your life to.
Just a little bit of experience there. But
that's crazy.
That's why, I would get cartoon bandages. Full on adults, because I'm like, well, I can't have this incognito nude Band-Aid like you. So you're going to see SpongeBob SquarePants.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you for what it's worth.
Yeah, I mean, it's great.
So something that is especially important to me is the question of, can an organization itself be anti-racist, or does it have to be comprised of anti-racist humans, which is really a question about like principles and values at different scales or at different levels of abstraction. And so how do you think about how those things dovetail, support each other? Is there hope?
Ooh, no, kidding. Obviously there's hope. I'm gainfully employed. So,
yes.
Right. There's that. It always comes down on the humans, because the humans make the system happen, right? Because they're practicing the policy, the procedure, they're doing the thing, they're doing the work of the system. The system can be changed only by people.
Right.
Right. So people have to be anti-racist. The system or the company can hold them accountable if they aren't being anti-racist, if that's the stance they took. But here's the plot twist. Lots of companies don't want to say that they're anti-racist. That also upholds values of white supremacy. That upholds white dominant culture. They're like, hey, we just want to focus on belonging, or hey, we just want to focus on diversity and inclusion, or we're really into like justice. So we're going to get into environmental justice, and then, like, that's the thing that we're going to do. And so those systems, those companies have to ask themselves, why do you not want to be anti-racist? Tell me what's wrong with being anti-racist and having that expectation for anyone who works, within that company.
So how do you feel then about the resilience of a system against incoming folks that maybe are not as educated or aware or frankly just conscientious about this stuff, in a system where the folks that did create it were really deliberate, and the agreements and the policies and the principles are kind of built to protect these ideas of equity and inclusion and diversity? Do you feel like there's then some resilience if the system is really bought in and has deep roots, or do you feel like you can't let those sorts of folks in? Or how do you think about the membrane around an organization that's trying to protect these ideas but knows that not everyone coming in the door is going to show up fully ready to play?
So a system or company that's chosen to be anti-racist, that person wouldn't be hired. Yeah. So, but if they want to be into performative advocacy, activism, they'll hire that person. Right. And then we know it's for show.
Right.
And because I know you're in a lot of these rooms, and we had an interesting conversation once just about, I was surprised at the level, naively surprised at the level of pushback you have gotten when you've talked about just being explicit about being anti-racist. When leaders in companies say like, yeah, no, I think it's environmental justice for us. Thank you. What's the rationale? Like, why? What's wrong with saying you're anti-racist if you're running a company? Like, why don't people want to do that?
Because then they feel that they're being called racist.
So it's like we were racist before and now we're anti-racist and we don't want to admit to have been racist. Oh, okay.
Yeah. So why people get stuck where it's a pain point, two places. One, saying the term white supremacy, and two, being anti-racist. Because, if you're saying white supremacy and you're a white person, then you're like, wait, but there's benefits for me. I like how 4th of July just used to be this wonderful time, like that's what it goes to. And, for the record, you can celebrate the 4th of July. I just realized it's like my people weren't free. And also 4th of July is for heterosexual, cisgendered, white privileged men. But that's just me and the rest of the world. So, there's that feeling. And then with being anti-racist, it's like, well, then that means I was, or the company was racist before. And maybe, I don't know, maybe, but I've never heard a good argument for not being anti-racist.
Yeah. So
for the listeners, anti-racist just means that there's an opportunity for people to have humanity and equality.
Yeah.
That's all that it is. And so if someone's saying they don't want to be anti-racist, it's like, oh, so you don't want me to have humanity and equality?
Right.
You want to pay me all this money to help me? Okay, well, that's a bit of a performative action, performative allyship, right? That's happening. So ultimately, everyone should be on a path to becoming anti-racist. And the companies that I work with that get there, they're doing the work. They understand it's going to take time, and they have to work through these various systems within their system, and then the vendors and the partners and all this other stuff to make that change, but they're committed to doing it and taking that journey.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I can see that kind of psychological break happening. I also think there's another fear, maybe a secondary fear, possibly an excuse as well, which is CEOs in this media climate, in this polarization climate, worrying about the health of their business if they align with something that is, for some very stupid reasons, very politicized. And so the idea of like, yeah, if I'm Walmart and I come out and say that, do I actually lose customers? I think is an actual boardroom conversation, even if it's an excuse or a dodge for the real conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I've had that conversation several times, and the answer is the same. It's not a sensitive issue. It's not a political issue. It's a humanity issue. So tell me your argument for not having humanity and equality for Black people, please. Please tell me. That's where I go with it.
Yeah.
Why do you not believe in my humanity and equality? And also, you want money from racists? Tell me more about that.
Yeah. And I think it's really fucked up, but I would say that the same narrative flow happens around the environment. Like, you know, they will poison the river for shareholder value. They will absolutely take racist money for shareholder value. Like, capitalism is the religion. It's wild.
Yeah. So I live in Oakland, California, and there's two main freeways here, 880 and 580. 580 is in the hills. 580 is where there's more the multi-million and million-dollar homes, the redwoods. We have so many parks and stuff above 580. 880 is lower. It's closer to the water. And that is where everyone knows the places of Oakland. So you have West Oakland, you have East Oakland, you have all, you know, people view Oakland as this is nothing but crime, but Oakland is so much more than that. And I bring this up because 880 is the only freeway that can have trucks on it. Big rigs. 580, they can't, for a certain part of 580, they cannot go on the freeway. And that's because they have more pollution, more exhaust, the diesel fuel. So that goes into BIPOC communities.
Right.
Right. And there's warehouses and stuff along the way. And it goes to the port of Oakland. I think we're the fifth largest port or something like that. So it goes there. Now, the reason why 580 doesn't have trucks is that Mills College, a private college here, they wanted to build in Oakland, but like, we don't want trucks. Because it was right by 580. We don't want big trucks because we want our beautiful campus to stay beautiful and blah, 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 blah. So the city of Oakland was like, okay. Right? And that's a systems design of things centered around capitalism because they wanted the school because what? It creates more jobs, brings more money into the city.
Yep.
And me, someone who has health issues, I live by 580. I'm in the hills because I need to be in a safe space. But I have the privilege to benefit from that system that's there. And there's other people who don't have that privilege because more affordable homes and housing are on the other side.
So interesting. Right? It's everywhere. It's everywhere we look. So as you in your work with companies, so you do this work all over the place with companies large and small, helping them to become anti-racist, whether they want to call it that or not. How do you approach this work? And at what size do you think it's possible to adopt different practices? At what scale does it just start to fall apart? I'd love to just hear a little bit about your work with companies and what the moves are.
Yeah, totally. So we work primarily in 4 areas. We have 4 pillars. So it comes in with strategy. And strategy can mean an audit. It could mean that we're conducting a full-scale survey, focus groups. We're looking at policies, practices, procedures to help them come up with a strategy or diversity roadmap or org change, restructuring, whatever it may be. The second pillar we have is where I get to fix shit, which I love. And that's where I get to be the Olivia Pope of diversity in the workplace. And that's crisis management and crisis recovery. So, you know, a company did something internally or externally or both, and they're like, what do we do? And, you know, we come in there and fix it. The third pillar we have is executive coaching. And so we coach leaders because leaders have the most power. And when leaders have the most power, they can make the most change. So we coach leaders specifically with a change. It may be a strategy, it may be their attitude, behavior, maybe education of terms like white centering and so forth. But we work with them individually and as groups. And then the fourth pillar is, I just talk a lot. I'm talking to you right now. We do workshops, keynote talks. I'll talk about my lived experience so people can learn and unlearn. So that's pretty much how we work with clients. Now, there's size, in fact, it does not matter when it comes to being an anti-racist company or developing a diversity strategy. Because again, it's just, you may have more layers of leadership, but it's all about building in accountability, communication, and transparency. So we focus on how can companies act? How can systems act? How can leaders act? Accountability, communication, transparency. And that trickles down, learning and unlearning, apologizing, making mistakes, being able to have crucial conversations, developing strategies for social media. How do we change our hiring pipeline to be more inclusive? What are we doing for retention for these intentionally ignored communities? How are we making sure everyone feels like they belong and that they can communicate their needs effectively? So anyone can get there as long as the highest level of leadership is engaged and invested in the work. If they are not, it doesn't matter the size. It could be 10 people. It could be 100,000 people. It won't happen.
Mm-hmm. And what I want to ask you about is also your style. So that was helpful to understand some of the mechanics. And I thought a lot about your style because we do coaching and facilitation as well. And I'm rarely coached and facilitated by someone who I enjoy being facilitated by, as I did by you. And so I feel like my experience of working with you as a coach of a group was like, you take this work incredibly seriously. It is obviously your life's work. And also you like have humor about it and lightness about it that makes it very possible to engage in a way that feels like quite safe. And I found in moments like where you would nudge me to a thing or be like, there's a better way to say that or whatever, I didn't ever have a charge that was like, oh, fuck, like I did that wrong, or now I'm ashamed, or I'm not going to try again, or anything like that. And like, I think a lot of that is because of how you interact with people. And so I wanted to like share that with you and just get your perspective. How much of that is like intentional and moves that you've cultivated over time to keep people in work that can often be uncomfortable? And how much of that is just like who you are as a person and so just happens naturally?
This is where I like to thank major depressive disorder for helping me use humor. So I do this selfishly for myself by bringing in humor because this work is incredibly traumatizing. The things I hear and see that happen directly to me or to the people in the company are not okay. This is not glamorous work. I will put that out there. Mm-hmm. I do like the swag though. But so I do that intentionally. Second, part of the disability I have is that my body thinks it's having a heart attack every day. And so I live with the symptoms of a heart attack. And so that's not fun. So I literally can't have stress. And then Beyonce and Oprah, those are my gods, were like, this is the work you're going to do. And I was like, but I could die. And they're like, yeah, but just use humor. You'll be fine. And so that's what I do. I use humor so that I can keep my stress levels down. But I also use humor because that provides a place of comfort, trust, and realizing if they can see that I can kind of laugh through something that is awkward and uncomfortable because I'm comfortable being uncomfortable, that they can do the same thing. Mm-hmm. They can come to me with things that they may not feel safe going to another Black person or BIPOC person. And they can feel as if no matter what they say or do, that I'm not going to judge them. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to note, again, that white people don't know what they don't know. So why am I going to be mad at you? That's the system of white supremacy. So if you have an opportunity to role model to me that they're willing to listen, learn, and unlearn, I don't take that for granted because it'll make someone else's life better as a result. And so that's why I mix humor into it. I like to think that I'm probably one of the best diversity, experts in the world. And that's because I come from a place of compassion, humanity, and empathy, because I have to lead with that for myself first. So because I'm all centered in accountability, communication, and transparency, my clients know I have a disability. My clients know that I may have just come out of the emergency room. I role model that behavior, but part of that behavior is adding the humor, adding the safe space, setting expectations, acknowledging mistakes, encouraging people to just keep going because I have to do the same for myself.
Mm-hmm. It's really interesting that this came up because we've talked recently about how there seems to be these different strata of experts and expertise and styles in this space. And there are certainly the uninitiated and the uninformed and how they show up in the world. And there are certainly people that have great mastery in this space. And one of the patterns that I think maybe, Rodney, you're the first one to mention this, but one of the patterns we've noticed is they hold the work with more lightness and more invitation and more humor and more curiosity than the middle strata, which is sort of like the woke Twitter mob that has just zero tolerance, right? And zero openness and zero humor. And I'm wondering if you've noticed that too, why you think that is, and how what could we do to try to extend that into the world? Is that just more mastery required, or are there other things we can do to shift that style and that narrative?
I mean, it's a great question. There's, some educators, activists, experts that come from the place of anger and rage and frustration, which I totally get. I totally get. I absolutely understand. And there's people who resonate and connect with that, which is fine. I personally believe in, moving away from cancel culture, calling out to calling in. How can we provide an opportunity for someone to learn, right, and unlearn? How can we collectively have shared accountability? How can they understand their accountability? How can they take their mistake and turn it into action? And I think that part is important. But along with, some people who may come from a place of anger, there are other experts that come from a place of prescription. Mm-hmm. You have to follow X, Y, and Z to get to anti-racism.
Yep.
And there's no formula for that, because that discredits the human design. It discredits human behavior, right? Because there can be a company that has a head of diversity and a structure and a plan, so maybe it'll be able to move forward, but their CEO may not be on board. So how are you going to use that? Prescription doesn't work. But there can be a company that doesn't even have a head of diversity and they outsource their HR, but their CEO is involved, so they're going to take it to the next level. And so we take the time to get to know our clients. We take the time to set this expectation. This is a reciprocal relationship. We're going to high five each other. We're going to push each other. I'm going to learn from you and you're going to learn from me. We're going to do this together, and in that's how we're able to have really wonderful conversations, transparency for them to, contact me when there's an emergency and feel safe doing that, because that is how you create change. When something's prescriptive or maybe forced, people can regress. Mm-hmm. And a benefit of the system of white supremacy is to pause, to be in a place of comfort. And if that person's like, oh my God, I'll never say that again, that was awful, blah, 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 then they're not going to be in a situation where they say like, hey, I don't know what just happened here, but let's pause this conversation. Or I need to do some research on this. Can I get back to you? To feel comfortable to do those things. Mm-hmm. So we really take the time to get to know people and honestly practice what we preach.
I find the dogma of the one right way in DEI work to be funny and ironic because it's so white.
It is. It honestly really, really is, because if you think about it, well, since we're getting down into it, it's centered on the consultant.
Right. Sure.
Because the consultant can say, well, and you both know this, we walked you through this process, so it's on you, but I did my part, so it's like, I worked with this company and we did X, Y, and Z thing. But there's really more benefit of change, which is why it's in the name of my business. Okay, so here we are. We're at this part. Ooh, actually, this thing came up in the survey. So we actually need a pivot. I know we have a scope of work, but this would give you more benefit, right? You can't do that with a prescription, and you can't do that with yelling at someone.
So much overlap in the way that you approach this work and the way that we approach this work, in that, in addition to it being more emergent and being more conscious of the complexities of systems of human beings, it's also shared ownership. Whether it's a DEI consultant or an org designer that comes in and says, well, my framework is fucking awesome, you guys just didn't use it right. It's like, well, who cares? If nothing happened and nothing changed and the client didn't evolve in any way, it doesn't really matter how good the framework is or how good the consultant is or how right we feel like we were. So yeah, I think all of that is true. Plus I would just hit the note of like stickiness. If we want clients to own becoming evolutionary orgs as we do, it has to be theirs. I always say to clients, I can't care about this more than you do.
Right.
Yeah.
And if they don't, that's their decision. I've had that conversation several times. It's like, okay, well, if you can't do X, Y, and Z things, you have to understand that you are being performative. Mm. And you also have to communicate to your staff, because it's always a big thing. Dr. Cadet is here. We have Change Cadet. I'm at the team meeting. I'm, waving. I'm on Instagram. I'm doing all these things. And, if they're like, oof, that we're not ready for this, then they have to role model accountability, communication, transparency, ensure that, hey, we are not ready to do this. So we're going to pause the work that we're doing right now. We're going to circle back at this time period because it's come to our attention. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Otherwise they're creating more and more of a problem.
The last thing that we want to ask you about before you get back to your day is about allyship. So you have talked very publicly about the fact that allyship will not actually help dismantle systemic injustice and supremacist ideology. So can you talk a little bit about becoming an accomplice and why that is necessary?
Yeah, in order to talk about an accomplice, I have to talk about why I think allyship is a waste of time. So allyship is the start. It is the pathway to becoming an accomplice. And an allyship is learning how to use your voice and your privilege when it matters, advocating for the least represented in the room, and, signing up to do some stuff, which I think is really, really important. Mm-hmm. But allyship allows for pause and comfort. So again, 4th of July, wait, what? No, don't take away my 4th of July. I can't. I've done all I can do. I'm just going to every year donate to the, NAACP Legal Defense Fund. And that'll be my jam. That will be it. It's not going to be how I'm showing up in a cafe or how I'm showing up in the workplace, because it was too far. Mm-hmm. And so that's why I encourage people to only use allyship as the training wheels on the anti-racism bike. So think about that. So allyship, being those training wheels, you're learning how to build the muscle of being an accomplice or an advocate. An accomplice is someone who looks at their own privilege and their bias. They're checking it daily. It's as routine as brushing teeth and putting on deodorant. It's a daily practice. And they're showing up in big and small ways of like, okay, I see this. It's a systemic issue here. I see that I can use my privilege here to change this situation. I can show up in a way to move towards humanity and equality for all. And that is daily practice. So those allyship training wheels on the anti-racism bike, because an accomplice is anti-racist, it's giving that person the power to lean into being comfortable, being uncomfortable, learning how to practice to make mistakes, learning how to apologize, learning all those things. And then they get to the point where they're like, you know what, these allyship training wheels got to go, because I'm ready to learn how to do a wheelie, right, on my bike. And that is why being an accomplice is an important part of humanity and equality for all. This is the same individual who can say like, okay, well, this thing is happening in America, but I also see the same pattern happening in South America. Mm-hmm. I see the same pattern happening over here, over there. And they can see how the system of white supremacy and white dominant culture pops up. And then they're holding themselves and others accountable.
Well, on that note, the idea of being an accomplice to the anti-racism heist, that sounds really, enlivening, but also like an important challenge for everyone to go sit with. So it also seems like a pretty good place to draw things to a close. Akilah, where can our listeners find out more about you and your work? Because there is a lot more.
There is. You can go to my website. There's a whole resources tab there, events that are listed there at change, the word change, and cadet, like cadet, CADET.com. Or you can follow me on any social media channel at Change Cadet. I'm the most active on Instagram, so you can come there. I do encourage people, if they have questions, they're welcome to DM me. I'll get back to you because I have boundaries. I'll get back to you. I will get back to you with what questions may come up. But really to, share any recommendations you have for single men, because I'm single. So, send them in, slide in my DMs, or send a profile, or send my profile to them. I mean, swiping is not fun in a pandemic. So I was like, I might as well just put it out there. You never know. So
you don't know if you don't ask.
One never knows. I love it. And for our listeners, if you like what you're hearing, we would love a review or forward our show to someone who needs to become a better accomplice. Akilah, thank you so much for coming today.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Rodney. This is honestly too much fun, and I'm going to be thinking about the fun for the rest of the day. So thanks for this.
A quick tip of the hat to Taylor Marvin for making all three of us sound good. Brave New Work is produced by The Ready, where we help organizations around the world change the way they work. Get in touch with us by emailing podcast@theready.com. We read them, we reply, we forward them to our mothers. And as for you, thanks for listening. Now go change something.